Let's get started. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you'll bless our time together today as we discuss some things that are going on in our world that are rather chaotic and troubling. Bless our hearts and keep us focused on you. In Jesus' name, amen. So today we're going to talk about Already Gone. I'm going to look a little bit about some of the things going on, sort of the chaotic, I guess you would say, political situation in the world. I'm going to look at some of the things that happened at the UN this week, and then we'll talk again, as we usually finish up, about the Middle East. And I'm actually going to do, just because I spent a lot of time putting them together, a fairly detailed explanation of some of the things that are going on in Israeli politics and the election and that sort of thing. So again, just as a reminder, we talk each week about the convergence of events and the fact that we live in a very disruptive world. I've mentioned that a lot of times that we live, I use the term convergence and unprecedented are terms I use all the time. And somebody sent me this from the UK. It was in one of the papers there, husband and wife talking. Sometimes I wish we could go back to living in precedented times. And I think that's true. Now, I don't know if there'll be an update next Sunday. I'm going to be speaking in Vancouver, Canada on Friday and Saturday at the Montreal conference, Friday evening and then during the day on Saturday. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is, I'm not sure how to title it yet, end times provisioning, because we do live at this time where I think everybody's concerned. Some people are scared, some are concerned about what's going to happen in the United States, what's going to happen in other places, and are we really going to undergo persecution? And the answer is, I certainly think so. And we've had a bit of a calm period in the United States and the West without facing a lot of persecution. Now that is changing on many, many levels. It's more subtle at the present time, but we're on the cusp of people. We already have people losing their businesses and jobs over taking a stand for biblical values and living like a Christian. So I'm going to talk a little bit about end times provisioning. I'm going to focus a little bit on this passage, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. So Paul says it's essentially a prophecy. There is coming an evil day, and I'm going to give you some instruction on how you can stand in the evil day. And we'll look at some other passages too when I speak in Vancouver on Thursday and Friday. I don't know that that'll be live streamed, but it will be, I'm sure it'll be on the Montreal TV YouTube channel after the conference. Well, the week in the United States, everybody's been concerned about this whistleblower complaint. And unless you've been living in a cave, there's a lot of things going on in Washington, D.C. But what's going on in Washington, D.C. is sort of typical of what's going on in other places throughout the world. I mean, there's even some political turmoil in Russia, in Iran, certainly in the United Kingdom with what's going on with Boris Johnson and Brexit and all those sort of things. And so, in Israeli politics, which we'll talk, the Israeli election for the Knesset and what's going to happen there, and is anybody going to be able to form a government? But this week there was a letter with a whistleblower complaint that was delivered to Adam Schiff. Well, it wasn't delivered this week, though. It was delivered, you'll see, back on August 12th, 2019, over a month ago. And so when Adam Schiff, this congressman, I think he's from California, he's certainly, with all due respect, I have a lot of good friends. I love California. But it takes, to rise to a certain level in politics in California, it takes a certain ability to leave reason behind and run and support the nonsense that they do. So he sort of said, well, I just got this whistleblower complaint, but he's had it for like 5 or 6 weeks, and he never brought it up. Now, the whistleblower complaint is essentially somebody said, well, I heard that President Trump had a conversation with the president of Ukraine, and he said some things in the conversation with the president of Ukraine that are maybe illegal. I heard about this from other people. And what's been done with this, of course, the Democrats have come out and Nancy Pelosi says we're going to do an impeachment inquiry, which is not the way an impeachment inquiry runs. They have to be a vote of the House. She doesn't get to unilaterally declare it. But her being from California for a long time and having lived in Baltimore politics, her father was mayor of Baltimore before that, which was a pretty corrupt place back in those days, she thinks she can just do whatever she wants. And they don't want to take a vote because it will impact the way certain House representatives in districts, they don't want to vote on impeaching President Trump because there are a lot of people in their districts that will get really upset with them. And I know from talking to some people who are not particularly politically involved, but the subject of this pending impeachment of the president and what they're doing came up. And I'm just telling you, several of my friends who don't really talk about politics all that much were absolutely livid. Not at President Trump, but at the conduct of Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and all of this. And you'll see what's happening is, of course, this is the front page of all the major papers, Los Angeles, Washington, New York. I just took a sample of them, where they took the whistleblower complaint. First, it was alleged, Trump is engaged in a mass cover-up. So what did President Trump do? Well, he released the transcript. I mean, it's sort of like, how do you have a cover-up when you're releasing the transcript the next day? And everybody can read it, but what has been done by the media, I saw this done on CNN, I saw Shepard Smith on Fox do it, the New York Times and the Washington Post did it, the way they tore apart the whistleblower complaint to make it look like something was said that was not said. Now listen, I'm used to this. I'm a lawyer, and believe me, I have seen people take things out of context, like in a deposition or an email or something like that, and beat people over the head to get them to say that they said something that they didn't really say. I see it all the time. Now it's on the front page of the New York Times, and it's appalling. So here's the headline from the New York Times. Trump asked for favor in call, memo shows. And it is true that he did ask for the favor, and you see in the first little excerpt of the transcript, it says, I guess it's in the second. Oh, it's in the third one down. I would like you to do us a favor because of our country. Okay? So they take this out of context, and the Washington Post did the same thing. But what they did was they put the favor thing here, and then right below it they did, I want you to look into have your prosecutor look into Biden's son. That's not what happened, because what happened in the transcript, there were 540 words between where he talked about favor and where he said there's a lot of talk about Biden's son. That's a lot. That's a fair amount of words. And so it is the height of dishonesty, the way this thing was cut and pasted. They're making it up. So this would be, I guess, the definition of fake news. And so now everybody's, complaint asserts a White House cover-up. President Trump is putting a lot of things in the secret vault to hide this information from people at the White House. Susan Rice, who was a close advisor to President Obama in the prior administration, she came out. I saw a quote of hers this morning where she said, oh, well, President Obama did the same thing. And so what you usually learn is when people are screaming about a cover-up and all this type of thing, what they're really showing is that they're trying to cover up what they're doing in the background. And a lot of what happened with Ukraine in our last election was funded by the Democrats. And I read the whistleblower complaint, and I can tell you it was written by a lawyer. It was not written, I was going to say, you can tell it was written by a lawyer because normal people don't really talk like that. So, whoops, I slipped on that one. I'm not allowed to I just violated one of the secret oath that we take as lawyers. We're not supposed to, we know all that is true, but we're just not allowed to say it out loud. But so it's appalling what they've done. Now, the interesting thing, and Sean Davis at the Federalist, one of the co-founders of the Federalist, I think did great work where he did an article, Intel Community's secretly gutted requirement of firsthand whistleblower knowledge. I don't know if you've heard about this. So what it used to be when a whistleblower complaint was filed, it had to be based on firsthand knowledge. It could not be based on secondhand knowledge, which a lot of times we refer to, I don't know if hearsay is the correct legal technical term that you would use in that situation, but you're not allowed to go in court and say, Bill told me this. Now there are many, couple dozen exceptions to the hearsay rule at least, as to that type of information might be allowed into court. But as a general rule, you don't want things based on what somebody told me. Remember the old game you used to play at youth group and that type of thing where somebody would was telephone? Okay, there's an old youth group attender back there. And you would you would give a phrase to somebody secretly, and then you would go around the circle, and at the end, it was not what was told to the person in the first instance. It totally changed. So there used to be a requirement of firsthand knowledge, but they came out with a new whistleblower form. This is one from the Office of the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, Disclosure of Urgent Concern form. Now, when you look down at the bottom of this, what you see is that this form was revised when? August 2019. When was the whistleblower complaint full of a little bit of hearsay? You'll see just about how much in a moment. When was that sent to Adam Schiff? August 12th. In other words, this form was revised just a few days before by the people within the Intelligence Committee. What did they do? They added this provision. I know about the information I am disclosing here, and I have direct and personal knowledge, or you can check the box, I heard it from others. And that's right there in the form. Now, when you look through this whistleblower complaint, what you find are these statements. I received information from multiple U.S. government officials. Officials have informed me. Officials with direct knowledge of the call informed me. It goes on. The White House officials who told me this information. I was told by White House officials. The officials I spoke with, I was told that a State Department official. I learned from multiple U.S. officials. One White House official described this act. On and on and on. And one of the things that you conclude is a statement that he said in this whistleblower complaint, he or she, I was not a direct witness to most of the events. And now the whole government in the United States is ground to a halt. Now, in some respects, it's good theater, it's fun to watch, it's interesting. And if they're worried about this and they're working on this, they're not enacting stupid laws that are going to make, put more restrictions on people's liberty and freedom and that sort of thing. So this is what happened. So they changed the whistleblower complaint, and miraculously, a couple days later, here comes a guy out of the intelligence community who supposedly worked in the White House, who gives piece of information after information after information that somebody told me, or I heard from, or somebody from here, or somebody from there. So because of that, it's going to take them forever to put this together. It's going to go on until the next election. They may get the vote to impeach President Trump. Senator McConnell, the head of the majority leader of the Senate, could just put the kibosh on it and say we're not going to move it forward. And they have to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate, and I just don't think they're ever going to do that. And even people who are now politically challenged, like our former governor, John Kasich, he even came out and said this is nonsense. So when John Kasich is saying something is nonsense, and he can figure it out based on the things that he's done over the last few years, seems to be a pretty open and shut case. The editorial boards everywhere are going on and on about it's time to impeach. This is the Sunday review section of this morning's New York Times. The allegations are grave. An election is at risk. The founders were clear. The only option, impeach the president. So we'll see what happens. I think that whether you like President Trump or not, I just think that this is not good for our political process. I don't think it was good when they impeached Clinton. It didn't help, didn't accomplish anything. It hurt the Republican Party quite a bit back in those days. And Clinton's still around. And he's much richer now than he was when he was president. Amazing how that worked. And I don't think, look, Biden's son, he got a pretty good paying job or consulting fees out of the company in Ukraine. Now, my understanding is he was sort of not successful or struggling, but his daddy is vice president, and all of a sudden he gets hired with something paying him, like $50,000 a month or more to sit on the board of this Ukraine gas company. I'm positive that they had nothing to do with his daddy being vice president of the United States. There's surely not a connection there. I mean, even I saw Bill Maher on HBO. Even he says this is all nonsense. And if you want to go after Trump, then you need to go after Biden and the other people who are just, if you're saying Trump is corrupt, then this is even worse. But if Donald Trump Jr. had done this, what do you think would be happening? They had done what Hunter Biden had done. So all this stuff, and a lot of this stuff came out of a Ukraine funding by this CrowdStrike organization that funded things that were done to attack Trump that led to the Russia Mueller investigation, Russia, swayed the election, whatever. So let's look at some other things here. Enough of that nonsense. This is an interesting survey I saw this week, came out from Barna. It was done on surveys about a year and a half ago, a little over a year ago. Generational differences on faith sharing. And so they divide it down into millennials on the left, Gen X in the middle, or the second from the left, then boomers, then elders. And I'm not sure what I am yet. Am I still a boomer or am I an elder? As long as they get me senior discount, I don't care. Okay, that's really what's the important thing. But down here, look at the one down here. It says this: it is wrong to share one's personal beliefs with someone of a different faith in hopes that they will one day share the same faith. Now, that's sort of a different way of saying evangelism, right? Well, look at the difference. So 20% of elders and 90% of boomers think that it's wrong to do that. 27% of Gen Xers, but look at the number of millennials. It's almost 50% of millennials thinks it's wrong to share your faith in the hope that somebody else will come to believe what you believe. Now, this is shocking because the whole climate change thing is based on getting people to believe the way you believe. It's sort of like when you have when I talk more about postmodernism and the emergent church and that type of thing, people would say, well, that's an absolute statement. You just can't make an absolute statement. You can't speak absolutely. Oh, you mean except for that one? That you're speaking absolutely, that you can't speak at, that's an absolute, right? And there's a cognitive dissonance that happens. Here's another one. If someone disagrees with you, it means that they're judging you. You don't agree with that? Are you judging me? And this is the whole basis of social media, is somebody disagrees with you and everybody goes off in a lather. This is a conference that's coming up, Reformation Project. This is Matthew Vine's organization. He wrote the book a number of years ago, God and the Gay Christian. I will just tell you, and so this is a organization. In fact, here's one of the principles of the Reformation Project, a Bible-based, gospel-centered approach to LGBTQ inclusion. The Reformation Project is a Bible-based Christian grassroots organization that works to promote inclusion of LGBTQ people by reforming church teaching, by changing church teaching, on sexual orientation and gender identity. We envision a global church that fully affirms LGBTQ people. That's the basis of this. And they'll say if you're against, if you cite biblical passages, they call them the clobber verses on homosexuality and that sort of thing. Well, you're unloving, but we're going to change the way you think. This is what Obama said after the same-sex marriage decision, Obergefell, in June of 2015. Be patient with your friends. They just need to get smarter and evolve like we have. And then they'll see the error of their ways. It's arrogance on steroids. There was a conference last weekend in Chicago called Liberating Evangelicalism. One of the speakers at that conference, I dug through the website a little bit, was they wanted to talk about things like white privilege and whiteness, and it's the social justice, cultural Marxism thing that's infecting the church everywhere you look. Now, remember I showed you last week about they changing the pronoun? They now refers to someone who is transgender in the singular. So here's one of the speakers. Just listen to what his biography said. Their biography says. I'm sorry, I'm so wrapped up in my white privilege, I guess, or heteronormativity. Miles Markham grew up in Destin, Florida, and is a graduate of Columbia International University in Columbia, South Carolina, where they earned their BS in Intercultural Studies and Bible. Although coming out prevented them from launching right into local church ministry, Miles went on to work in international relief and LGBTQ advocacy as the director of outreach for the nonprofit Planting Peace in Topeka, Kansas. And it goes on down there. In 2015, and resides in Atlanta, Georgia, where they are pursuing an MDiv at Columbia Theological Seminary. So this is who wants to liberate evangelicalism. And they had workshops. For example, here's a workshop or plenary session, Biblical Theologies for Decentering Whiteness. I had to go to one of these sometimes just to, they would look at me and they would say, well, that's a big task to decenter you from anything. Here's one of the other. This is a workshop, Stop Being White, an accountability space for white people. This is a workshop for people who have been socialized to identify as white. To help them think theologically about their identity. The title of this workshop is drawn from the work of Angela Davis, a radical, burn it down, communist, Marxist, leftist, whatever description you want to put before thug. I want you to understand, do you understand the gravity of what we are seeing? That the foundations of things that we thought were okay are being torn down. Of course, they had Bridges for Peace there to discuss about the Israel-Palestinian social justice issues, that sort of thing. Of course, they had those sessions. And one of the people that I saw at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference that I went to in Oklahoma City last year, she was running one of those conferences. So ultimately it says here, we are aiming to move from white guilt and fragility towards sobriety and activism. What does this even mean? How many graduate degrees do you have to teach you to write like this? Here it was, Israel, Palestine, and seeking justice. Evangelical Christianity is intimately linked with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, from its intersection with Christian Zionism in Western Europe and the United States to its roots within the Palestinian community. Look down a couple sentences here. Last sentence, they will learn how to elevate the voices of indigenous peacemakers in Israel-Palestine, as well how to advocate for justice for Israel-Palestine within their own communities. Before that, it says this: participants in this workshop will grapple with the challenges of constructing a theology on Israel-Palestine that is anti-colonial but not anti-Semitic. By the way, good luck with that one. Because I've been to your conferences and you're not even close. You might think you are when you talk about to other people at your conference, but somebody throw in, a little hand grenade of a thing called reason or what the Bible says and that type of thing, and they're lost. I will also say, I did not have time to edit it. If you go to Enemies Within the Church, this is a website put up by Trevor Loudon and his group. I think it's enemieswithinthechurch.com. They have an extended video of clips of people speaking at a recent CRU conference. That's the name now for Campus Crusade. All of it is social justice, cultural Marxism, inclusion, that type of thing. It's shocking. It's hard to believe. And so I think if you're supporting people in Cru, you need to evaluate that. Because the organization is, in my judgment, is gone. I'll talk a little bit about that at the conference in Vancouver also, is how long do you stick with these organizations when they fall apart? And I'm not going to tell you today. That's just a little tidbit. This was in a number of newspapers in the UK about a seminar that took place Friday, a one-day conference, I guess yesterday, at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Resisting Whiteness 2019, Anti-Racist Action in the UK. And here, there's the article, that was in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and Guardian, a number of the newspapers. The University of Edinburgh has been criticized for hosting an anti-racism event in which white people are to be banned from asking questions. The conference has been organized by the Resisting Whiteness group, which describes itself as a queer and trans people of color organization. There will be 2 safe spaces at the event, one of which white people will be barred from entering. Jay McCall, an anti-racism campaigner, said that the event itself was blatantly racist. A spokesman for the university, these are the guys, these guys really have courage. We have expressed our concerns, and the organizers are revising their safe space policy as a result. Thanks for really taking a stand there. And then what it said, if you are a white person with a question, please share it with a member of the committee or our speakers after the panel discussion. Okay. I'll give them credit. They didn't describe it as an open forum. This is a message that came out from Pope John Paul II. He's gone, right? They all run together. Pope Francis. I don't even know what number is he, 16? I mean, he's clearly number one in terms of a leftist Marxist apostate pope. I'm not suggesting that any of the popes of the Roman Catholic Church have been okay. I'm just saying, is this one he seems to fall into a very special category of his own. And so here he is, comes out with the message of His Holiness Pope Francis for the launch of the Global Compact on Education. Because the Catholic Church has done so good in the way they've conducted themselves, right, that we want them educating everybody. Seriously. So he says this, they're having a conference in Rome next year, May 14th, 2020, which happens to be the birthday of the nation of Israel. I don't know if there's a connection there or not. Today's world is constantly changing and faces a variety of crises, he says. We are experiencing an era of change, a transformation that is not only cultural, but also anthropological, creating a new semantics while indiscriminately discarding traditional paradigms. Do you see where he's coming from? The Pope, who bases everything on tradition, is saying we got to get rid of traditional paradigms. Education classes with what has been called a process of rapidification that traps our existence in a whirlwind of high-speed technology and computerization, continually altering our points of reference. So we create chaos, and then we'll give you the way to do it. Every change calls for an educational process that involves everyone. There's thus a need to create an educational village in which all people, according to their respective roles, share the task of forming a network of open human relationships. And in this letter that he put out inviting people to Rome to be and join in this global compact on education, he referenced and I played the clip a couple weeks ago, I think, of him signing the document with the imam from Al-Azhar University, the largest Sunni theological or most important Sunni theological institution on planet Earth in Cairo, Egypt. The same Al-Azhar University where Barack Obama went on June 4th, 2009, and gave his speech that, in my view, eventually was designed to launch the Arab Spring and cause chaos. And we know that Obama supported the Muslim Brotherhood as they came to power in Egypt. And even the Muslims, a lot of the Muslims in Egypt couldn't stand what they were doing. And so they overthrew the government. And now this week we see that there's chaos in some respects in Egypt as the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to come back to power. When that happened, I wrote a thing for Bill Koenig's newsletter on Turkey. Erdogan is a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is, I think, fomenting some of this stuff in Egypt. It's also being funded by Qatar, which is only a few 100,000 people. We're really one of the most wealthy countries on the planet that put out Al Jazeera and that type of thing. So there's a lot of tension and things going on in the Arab world. So I'm just pointing out that this is the Pope joining with Al-Azhar University saying, oh, we all worship the same God, et cetera, blah, 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 kumbaya, that type of thing. This was announced this week in the United Arab Emirates, an interfaith peace at the heart of a higher committee of human fraternity. It's called the Abrahamic Family House Project. Will show we are all brothers. It's to be built in the United Arab Emirates. And you see this was a particularly week when everybody was pushing for globalism. So here was President Trump holding a religious freedom forum at the UN early this week to push religious freedom. Now, I will be honest with you, I don't have time to talk about it today, but I have some concerns. I'm all for religious freedom, but I also have concerns about the way the document was worded. But it was worded like a politician would word it, but it has some very concerning things because I think in some respects it tracks along with what the Pope said. Now, I don't know if President Trump drafted it, but he was there supporting it. So, and I'm concerned about the way the thing read. And we can go through that in the weeks and months or however long we have to talk about this. These are some other stories that are troubling too. China's repression is growing. This is from the New York Times just Friday or Saturday. Beijing continues its abuse of Uyghur Muslims and now has another minority group in its sights. And the interesting thing is these Uyghur Muslims in Western China are being put into concentration camps. They're heavily surveilled if they're not in the concentration camp. There have even been videos over on the internet showing people being drugged through train stations and chains and everything to be taken to these concentration camps. They're re-education camps. And listen, the people in Hong Kong, they see this. They know what's going on. This is why they're upset. And I have people say, oh, well, boy, aren't those people in Hong Kong, they're so disrespectful of authority and that sort of thing. There's a reason why they're afraid of what this authority represents. They know what's going to happen. And China's not living up to all the things that they agreed to. And so they're cracking down on Muslims. And the interesting thing is, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, other countries, they don't say anything about it. Why? China's spreading the money around. They're buying them off. And nobody seems to care about the Uyghurs. Now, I don't know their theology. They may be, they may lean towards terrorism and that sort of thing. But China this week, so they want to institute, they're trying to go after Big Brother, or they're trying to institute their Big Brother onto businesses to get them to do their surveillance work. So if you want to do work with China, you have to institute these kind of technologies so we can watch everybody and what they're doing. And we talked about the social credit score. China now wants to do a business credit score. How well are you at surveilling people? And if your score isn't high enough, we won't do business with you. Read the article. By the way, this is the New York Times. You understand? And look, I get criticized. You shouldn't read the New York Times. Every now and then they get it right. They do. Front page this morning, New York Times. You see the title here? Child sex abuse on the internet, stolen innocence gone viral. And they have a big front page article. They have 3 interior pages totally devoted to the subject of what's going on with the sexual abuse of children using the internet. And on the one page, they have some statistics. Look at these statistics. At the top, it says, in 1998, there were 3,000 reports of child abuse imagery on the internet. Okay, so one dot, and that represents 100 reports. So in 1998, the whole year on the internet, now the internet wasn't used as much then as it is now, 3,000 reports. Look what happened. A decade later, the reports are now over 100,000. In 2014, the number surpassed 1 million for the first time. Last year, the one at the bottom, move all the way down, 18.4 million. From 2014 to 2018, it grew from 1 million to 18.4 million. Those reports included over 45 million images and videos flagged as child sexual abuse. Do you think we have a problem? Jesus had some pretty harsh words for people that are abusive to children. Involved a millstone, a neck, and water. And the article goes on with talking about some of the problems. So look, I'll give the New York Times credit. I didn't have time to read all the article in depth, but at least they're addressing a very, very serious problem in our world, the sexual abuse of children. Stolen innocence gone viral. There's a lot of abuse of the children that goes on. We saw one of the biggest examples of it this week at the UN when the 16-year-old St. Greta from Sweden, she came over on a private sailboat. My understanding is they're flying a crew over to take the sailboat back. She was in D.C. this week, castigating members of Congress, which is, a lot of times that's okay. You know, we're not getting too hard on her for that, but she hits the leaders up for empty words on climate change. Here's just a couple clips of her.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
Okay, here's another clip.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? And you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us. But the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
So in global climate religion, forgiveness is not an option. And this is a religious view. It's not, look, we can argue about the science, like we have the science, they have feelings. And so without attacking her individually, I'm very concerned that people are pushing her to the front at her age, and she has a disability. And I think they're using her. And it's like Al Gore. He was a senator. He was vice president, and now he's worth over $100 million, or $400 million, or whatever the number is, because it's a business to him. This whole climate change. Listen. As somebody said, and I think I posted this on my Facebook page. Listen, Greta, we will start believing you when you act like there's a crisis. Flying around on private jets and that type of thing and that sort of thing doesn't seem to me that it's really affecting the way you live. And yet you're preaching to us. And that's sort of the height of hypocrisy. The American Spectator has a great little article, The Apotheosis of St. Greta. The Thunberg phenomenon is an apocalyptic religion for rich whites. The intrusion of this kind of sub-religious foolishness into politics is always a bad sign. It shows us that we are in an environmental crisis, that the world is coming to an end, but which environment and which world? The acclamation of Greta Thunberg is as profoundly irrational as the millenarian cult of purgation and redemption that she advocates. Puritan in its authoritarian demands, lascivious in its sensitivity to pain. The environment that is dying is the liberal democratic world order in which we live. The world that is coming to an end is political, the post-1945 order led by the United States. The form of Greta Thunberg's Greta, I guess he misspelled that on purpose, I think. Greta Thunberg's protest is similar to any student of medieval Europe, the civilization that produced the Children's Crusade and Joan of Arc. The content of her protest is a deliquescence of Protestantism into narcissistic terror. St. Greta was 5 years old when the wheels came off the European economy in 2008 and stole the dreams of a generation. The Swedes, like most other Europeans, have given up on procreation. Their demography is sustained by massive immigration, which their leaders tells us is necessary in order to maintain the tax base and the welfare system. A culture without purpose seizes on a false prophet because she signifies a faith that it has lost. This is why the cult of St. Greta attracts converts in the affluent classes of Western Europe and North America. The stations of her martyrdom are in Stockholm, London, and New York. not just because the Chinese police would make short work of her and her PR handlers if they tried any nonsense near the Great Hall of the People, but because this daft circus only means something in the decaying West. Very interesting. There's another good article on the Spectator this week, talking about a little bit about the chaos in British politics and the Supreme Court intervening and saying, Boris Johnson, you had no authority to go to the Queen and shut down Parliament. This is in some respects fits very much into Bible prophecy. Because in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus told us that, and I apologize, I'm not sure it was in the Olivet Discourse, but he did tell us, you're going to be brought before what? Magistrates and judges. And I've said this many times, the one person in our system in the United States that you ought to fear is a rogue prosecutor and corrupt magistrates and judges, because they can destroy your life in a heartbeat. Look at what they did to the guys at Duke University with a corrupt prosecutor. This is something that can happen. This is, so now let's look, well, one other thing about the UN. President Trump gave speeches, a lot of people gave speeches, I have a ton of these. Here's one of these guys. This is from the Washington Post the other day. Leader of the West, Macron raises his hand. And you remember the cover of The Economist magazine about Macron walking on water? Okay, now this is my response to that, Macron walking on water. I don't think he's been doing that well. So let me just play a couple clips of people talking about at the UN. First of all, here is King Abdullah of Jordan. Whoops. Next slide.
My friends, collective action is also vital for ending bitter crises and conflicts. And no crisis has done more global damage than the core conflict in my region, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Neither side has achieved the durable peace that a secure future depends on. And regional and world stability has continued to pay the price. It is a terrible irony that the land holy to three faiths, faiths which share the great commandment to love one's neighbor, should ever be a place of conflict. This is the land where prophets walked, the land where generations of Muslims, Christians, and Jews have sought to live in obedience to God, teaching their children compassion, mercy, and respect for others. Segregation, forced displacement, violence, and mistrust do not belong in this holy land. 40 years ago, my father, his late Majesty King Hussein, who loved peace, stood in his very chamber and decried the occupation and attempts, in his words, to eradicate from the world's memory centuries of history and tradition and spiritual, moral, and cultural ideals. It is a global moral tragedy that the occupation continues. But no occupation, no displacements, no acts of force can erase people's history, hopes, or rights, or change the true heritage of our shared values among the three monolithic faiths. And nothing can take away the international rights of the Palestinian people to equality, justice, and self-determination. My friends, young people ask me, why does not the world stand up for Palestinian rights? Isn't it time to answer them by showing that global justice and human rights belong to them too? And it begins with respect for the holy sites and rejecting all attempts to alter the legal status of East Jerusalem and the authentic historic character of the holy city, Jerusalem. What lessons do we teach young people when armed personnel enter Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, even as Muslim worshippers gather to pray? As a Hashemite custodian, I am bound by a special duty to protect Jerusalem's Islamic and Christian holy sites. So let us safeguard the holy city for all humanity as a unifying city of peace. And we must also press forward towards an end to the conflict and a just, lasting, and durable peace through realization of the two-state solution, a solution that is in accord.
Okay, enough. I don't know what planet he lives on. I know where he lives, okay? In 1995, we went to Jordan and Israel in Rome on a trip. And the first night we were there, we stayed at a hotel, and it overlooked a little bit of a valley. And on the other side of the valley was the royal palace of the Kingdom of Jordan. So I know they live there. They don't live like many other people in Amman, I will tell you that. But his did you see what he said at the end? We have to protect the Christian and Muslim holy sites. Now, he did mention Jews early on, but he says we have to look at the historical holy character or the historical evidence. They're digging that up all the time. And guess what? It's all Jewish in Israel. Every week there's something else. You know, when I talk about this thing, almost anything that I talk about could be its own hour or two. Or 3, you know how I am. But it's amazing. And the two-state solution has been offered. It's been rejected. And who occupied the West Bank after 1948? His father and grandfather, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Yeah, let's talk about occupation. Let's talk about the destruction by your grandfather and father of Jewish holy sites in the Jewish quarter of the old city, banning Jews from going to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, and even today, following them around when they're on the Temple Mount, if you let them up there. What a big, fat hypocrite this guy is. My wife told me I had to be nice, so I'm being nice by saying that, because there's things I would really rather say. There's some things in life that really irritate me. This is one of them. Driving slow in the left lane, too. That one is way up there. Well, another speaker, look, Rouhani came and he spoke, and, you know, here's a summary of what he said, blah, 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 Israel's bad, blah, 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 Iran is good, blah, 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 etc. And there were everybody spoke. And I could fill hours and hours with just some of the summaries of some of the things that I've been pulling apart from this. Another speaker at this was President Erdogan of Turkey, talking about global injustice, peace and security, talking about what we need to do. I'm going to skip over his talk, although, well, maybe I'll play just a moment of it. Of course, he was there. He was introduced, President of Turkey. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to skip it because I just don't have enough time to go into it. But he talked a little bit about the nation of Israel and how Israel seems to be taking over all the Palestinian land. He also had this picture of what he wants to do with create a safe zone in Syria. So what he proposing to do is to move Syrians, refugees. He has about 3.8 million of them in Turkey, and it's causing a problem. In fact, this week there were reports that people in Istanbul are afraid of earthquakes or sleeping out in the open because they don't want to be in a building. But so they're going to take money and people, and they're going to move and resettle everybody in this strip along the border. He wants to get rid of the Kurds, This is the man who wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And what did they do to the Armenians 100 years ago? How many million? Slaughtered. Go look up the pictures. You think this guy would ever acknowledge this? And so he wants to move everybody there. They're going to spend $27 billion on this resettlement. Villages of 5,000, 10,000 people. They even have people out there pushing Twitter. $27 billion. Here's some of the drawings of buildings that they want to construct. Here's what somebody said on Twitter this morning. If this person's in Turkey, he needs to get out. But it says this, what did you not mention, President Erdogan, is that it will cost $27 billion. Erdogan wants the EU to pay for it, and he expects Turkish companies to undertake the reconstruction. Sounds logical, and I bet the EU will agree. Now, where is that genie that grants wishes to RTE, that's Recep Erdogan, in his sleep? And this is a big problem. This is causing some fractures. We talk about the alliance of Turkey, Russia, and Iran, and what's going on in Syria, but there's a lot of conflict between them. This is a article in this morning's Asharq al-Awsat, which is an Arabic language funded by Qatar, I believe. Publication is published in London. And London is very heavily Arabic. When we were in London a year ago, in our hotel, there were 50 channels on the cable. 9 of them were Arabic language. We were 4 blocks from Hyde Park. Right across Hyde Park is Buckingham Palace. So listen, so this is published in London, and essentially this article says, look, this is a picture of Aleppo, and Erdogan is bad and causing all kinds of problems. This morning there were some news articles about things going on in the Middle East. This is a very strange reports that I've been seeing everywhere. Thousands of Saudi troops captured in Houthi border attack at the Yemen-Saudi Arabian border. Saudi Arabia has not confirmed this yet. It's been reported. I saw it in Reuters, BBC, The New Arab, which is also published in London. This is the English version of the Arabic language publication. But the Saudis are very, very quiet about it. They're not saying a word. And so I don't know I can't say with certainty that it is or is not true. I did confirm it in many publications, but they all seem to be based on the same source. And this is what the Houthis are claiming. If it is true, this is a big deal. Because first of all, it shows that the Saudi military is really not that good. And if somebody's going to protect the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it's going to have to be somebody with a good military, and I think you know who that means, and who the Saudis are looking to come and help them out. It could be one of 2 countries. This was also reported that the bodyguard of Saudi King Salman was shot dead in an altercation at the Royal Palace, I believe in Riyadh, just Friday or Saturday. He was a major general, promoted to that, long time of King Salman and his brother who passed away a few years ago. And then this was reported this morning on Twitter that this is a fire engulfing the train station in Jeddah that links Jeddah, Mecca, and Medina. And as this report says, chaos is starting to spread in Saudi Arabia. But back at the UN, this was another one, is that Erdogan chaired like President Trump chaired something on religious freedom, he chaired one on hate speech. Because he's the paragon of press freedom and all sorts of things in Turkey. He said that hate speech has become the most frequently used tool in the spread of anti-Muslim sentiment, racism, and xenophobia, underlying that Turkey is determined to contribute to efforts to fight it. And what he's really saying is, can I translate it? This is, by the way, Daily Sabah is a publication that is controlled by Erdogan and supports him in everything that he does. The translation is, if you speak against Islam, we're coming after you. That's going to be the sole definition of hate speech when we get to it. Rouhani spoke that the Middle East is just one big blunder away from a big fire. Danny Danon spoke and said that Arab states are coordinating the fight against Iran at the UN. Okay, so now let's talk about something simple, Israeli politics. So there's a great website, Wikipedia. If you want to geek out, if you know, looking at the Electoral College maps and everything on election night, you know, is entertaining to you and exciting, you'll love this Wikipedia page on the Knesset. So when they have 120 seats, there were 20 parties that ran in the election, and they got somewhere around 125,000 votes collectively, and they got no seats. So, you know, we think it's a mess with two parties, and maybe an independent guy thrown in every 4 years. Okay, so these are the 20 parties that ran but didn't get anything. Okay, now the parties that ran and got something were 9 parties, and they got the 120 seats, and that's the breakdown. So now there's also something you need to understand is that the parties themselves, while it says blue and white, it's not the blue and white party. It's several parties who come together to call themselves the blue and white party. For example, you get down here to Yamina, Ayat Shaked was the head of that, but it's a conglomeration of parties. So blue and white is at least 3 parties. Likud is 1 party. The joint list is a number of Arab parties, very anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. And in fact, I saw somebody talking about what one of the heads of one of the parties said, and he was like Yasser Arafat speaking, drive the Jews into the sea and that sort of thing. And that was just like this week. Of course, you never hear that really reported. So here's sort of how the parties break down. If you didn't think that 20 parties with nothing was complicated, here's how they break down. So there are 120 seats in the Israeli Knesset, and in order to have one form of government, they need 61 seats to support that one Knesset member who will then become the prime minister. So here's how it broke down in the election by color. I'll explain this a little bit more detail. So among the 2 major parties, blue and white got 33 and Likud got 32. So blue and white, so the question is, who gets to form the government? Who has the most people supporting them? That's the one who will be able to form. So if you add in the Labor Gesher Party, you get up to 39 for blue and white, Danny Gantz. Then you add in the Democratic Union, and then the Arab Joint List. That gets you to 57. Members of Knesset would support Danny Gantz. But there was a problem with the Joint List. This, by the way, this is a big deal. The first time the Arab Joint List ever really said they would support someone in the formation of a government. Why? Because they hate Netanyahu. You know, and so they say, you know, blue and white, you don't like Netanyahu either. You want to get rid of him, so we want to join with you and appoint Danny Gantz as the prime minister. So, but 3 of the Arab people said, nope, we're not going to support that. So that took the blue and white group down to 54. Now, why does that matter? Well, how many did the Likud come up with? They started with 32. You add in United Right, the New Right, which is the Yamina party. That gets you to 39. Then you go to the United Torah and the Shas party, and that gets you to 55. So when they went to have a meeting, they had a meeting. They had meetings they're going to try to form a unity government. But then Prime Minister or President Rivlin had to choose, okay, who has the best chance of forming a government? And what Netanyahu did with Likud was right after the election, he went to the right, conservative religious right parties, largely Orthodox Judaism, and they entered into an agreement. That gave him 55. That immediately put him above Danny Gantz, who only had 54. Now, one party I haven't mentioned is Yisrael Beitenu, and I'm not sure I've said that exactly right. This is Avigdor Lieberman's party. He used to be the defense minister and used to be in a coalition with Likud. He got 8 votes. So one way to look at it is, okay, if he joins with Danny Gantz, that would give blue and white and Danny Gantz 62 votes. Gantz would become the new prime minister. But there's a problem with that. Lieberman says, I want nothing to do with the Joint Arab List. I will not join a coalition if they're part of it. So that takes them from 62 down to 52. They lose those 10 votes. So then the question is, well, can Lieberman go over to the Likud group, add his 8 Knesset votes to the 655 that Netanyahu already has? And the answer is, yeah, you could do that, except he's saying, nope, I want nothing to do with the religious right parties. They have too much influence. They don't serve in the military. They have too much influence and outsized influence. And so that takes the Netanyahu coalition down to 48 if Lieberman's party is part of it. Now, they could do a unity party, which everybody would see. So Rivlin looked at it and he says, okay, Netanyahu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to task you with the task of, I'm giving you the mandate, and they symbolically hands him the mandate to go form a government. They have about 6 weeks, really about 4 weeks left now, because they've been going back and forth since the election. They have to do it within 6 weeks. And so Netanyahu gets it. And then this morning there were these reports that Netanyahu is going to return the mandate to Rivlin today because he's not able to put together a coalition. And now Gantz is going to get a chance. And so what does all of this mean? What all of this means is that it's very likely there's going to be a third election within a calendar year. This is troubling because there's a lot of things going on in the Middle East. There's a great article written by Douglas Feith and a colleague about Russia's Eastern Mediterranean strategy. Look at this: Russia multiple reasons to intervene in the Eastern Mediterranean, to aid the Syrian regime, allies of long-standing, to bolster its new alliance with Turkey and Iran, and otherwise to gain leverage against the United States. Among its main interests, speaking of Russia, however, is increasing world energy prices. As has been true for decades, the Russian economy is largely the business of exporting oil and gas. Russia and President Putin depend on their existence on high prices for energy. It's surprising how many articles are written about Russia's Middle East policies or its other foreign policies that fail to mention this point. But we talk about it quite a bit here, that this might be the hook in the jaw that brings them down into the Middle East. Russia wants to get involved in Saudi Arabia. So this is a great article. It's in Friday's Jerusalem Post. You might want to look it up. And so it's very, for example, here the article says, Israeli officials say they're not in a position to treat Russia as the enemy. A major dispute with Russia would make it harder, if not impossible, for Israel to strike Iranian forces in Syria. And that is Israel's main interest here, an interest that the United States shares, whether or not publicly stated. So Russia's been very clever the way they've kind of entrenched themselves in Syria, but they don't want to do it at a great cost of life. They've used mercenaries a large part. They don't have a ton of troops there, but they're getting their base, they're getting their deep water port at Tartus, and they're getting their base, I think, at air base at Latakia. But what's happening, and what a lot of people are seeing that do analyses of these, is that this is an editorial cartoon from a Saudi paper a number of months ago, showing that you see when they're firing the guns, Iran on the left and Russia on the right, they're hitting each other in the head. And that's a very good picture of what's going on in Syria, because there is a lot of tension between Iran and Russia. Russia doesn't want Iran to get too much influence, and Iran wants to get a lot of influence, and they're seeding these militias all the way through. Nasrallah was in Tehran this week. Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, was in Iraq this week. So there's a lot going on. And so they're trying to build up the military. Iran is trying to build up its military near Damascus, and Russia's saying, no, we don't really want that to happen. I would highly recommend that you go to Israel Hayom, Hayom. This is a free newspaper in Israel published by Sheldon Adelson and his wife. She's the publisher. I think it costs them $40 million a year out of their own pocket to produce this. They've been big supporters of the Netanyahus, but there's been kind of a breach in their relationship. But they interview Brigadier General Dror Shalom, the head of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate's Research Division. And he warns in this interview, it goes on for a number of pages. Of course, you can't read it because it's in Hebrew, but there is an English translation at israelhayom, Hayom.com. He says Israel is in a dangerous round against the Islamic Republic and needs to keep a tight grip on the wheel. In an exclusive interview, he says that despite the evolving threats, Israel is working hard to frustrate Tehran's ambitions. We move from lopping off branches to chopping down trees. But he recognizes and he says, listen, Iran is really the problem for Israel. We have a lot of problems, but it's really Iran. Some quotes from the article: we are seeing a much more chilling picture recently. The past year and a half, I've raised the volume about how volatile things are. We're in a much more complex reality than we were in the past, and it's only getting worse. At the end of the day, it's all about Iran. We're in a dangerous round against Iran. We need to keep a tight grip on the wheel. And this is affecting policies. He goes on, he mentions Soleimani. He says, I know him. I study him. Soleimani is a very serious guy. He's the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. He's very powerful in Iran. And the way Iran is structured, they sort of divvy off portfolios of businesses of things to people. So some of these Ayatollahs control $25, $30 billion of wealth. Soleimani is a similar one. He has a lot of wealth that he controls. Whether he lives a wealthy lifestyle or not is irrelevant. It's how much he controls and the way he uses that. Soleimani is a very serious guy, Shalom says. He learns, he's very determined, he has faith, and he is always improving. Now he has started setting up military capabilities there that are designed to attack us, Israel, without fighting an actual war. He's very close to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, like a son. And that's important because it biases the way the Iranian leader sees things, as if he didn't have bias already. Soleimani believes in the Islamic Revolution with all his heart, and he is the main one who is executing it, who translates the ideology of Khamenei and Ayatollah Khomeini into practice and influence on the region as a whole. And this, when you put this in the context of the turmoil in Israeli politics, this is a big deal. There's a lot of turmoil here. Netanyahu the other day went to a gathering of IDF officers to toast Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year that begins this evening, to celebrate essentially the creation of the world, the Feast of Trumpets. And Netanyahu warned the proven ability of Israel's military would be facing a difficult year in the coming months. The ability of this form to carry out many missions simultaneously, this ability is going to be challenged as it has never been. He said, we know what is going on around us and what is raging around us. Until today, I think that we have navigated things with both daring and responsibility, just as the Chief of Staff has described, on many fronts, on occasion simultaneously, but not in an overall confrontation. And he finished with this, we've never really faced this before, is what he's saying. So that, I think, plays into Bible prophecy. So look, a very tumultuous world, political problems everywhere, cultural problems everywhere, apostasy rising in the church. As I started with the verse early, on from Ephesians chapter 6. Your defense, put on the whole armor of God. That's what will protect you. Read about it, learn about it, God, and pray that God will use you for his glory. That's what we should really all be about. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Pray that you'll watch over us this day. Lord, I just pray if there's anyone in the sound of my voice that has never believed the wonderful gospel of the grace of Jesus Christ, who came to earth, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, arrested, crucified, risen again, ascended to heaven, and coming again, that the believing that Jesus is the way of salvation is the only hope for this world. I pray that they will act on that today. Bless us this week in Jesus' name, amen.